two young black sisters arrived at the airport expecting nothing more than a routine flight home. Instead, they were stopped at the gate, questioned, and told they would not be boarding. No explanation seemed to make sense, and the way they were treated left them terrified and humiliated. But the airline had no idea who their father was, or what would happen when the girls finally reached for their phones. One call was enough to trigger a chain of events no one at that airport could have predicted. So, what happened after their father answered? The sisters, Maya and Nia Carter, were 15-year-old twins who had grown up surrounded by opportunity, but their father had always made sure they understood the value of humility. Their father, Marcus Carter, was the founder and CEO of one of the fastest-growing transportation companies in the country. Despite his demanding schedule, he remained deeply involved in his daughters' lives. Maya and Nia were nearly inseparable. They dressed alike, finished each other's sentences, and had the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing they were loved and supported. That weekend, they were traveling home after visiting relatives, carrying nothing unusual, just two small suitcases, backpacks, and their boarding passes. At the airport, everything seemed normal at first. Families moved through security, announcements echoed across the terminal, and passengers lined up at their gates. The twins joined the boarding line without expecting any trouble. Then an airline employee stopped them. At first, Maya and Nia assumed there had been a mistake with their tickets. But the employee began asking questions that made the girls increasingly uncomfortable. Other passengers continued boarding while the twins remained standing beside the gate, unsure why they had suddenly been singled out. What happened next would turn a routine trip into something neither sister would ever forget. And within minutes, the airline would discover that stopping those two girls had been a decision with consequences far beyond that airport gate. Maya and Nia stood beside the boarding gate as passengers continued filing onto the plane. Every few seconds, another group disappeared through the jet bridge, while the twins remained where they had been stopped. At first, they tried to stay calm. They showed their boarding passes again. They checked their identification. Everything matched. Their names were on the reservation. Their seats were assigned, and their flight was clearly displayed on the departure screen. But the employee still refused to let them board. The situation became more uncomfortable when the twins noticed that other passengers were being allowed through without the same level of questioning. Maya kept looking toward the aircraft, realizing that the doors would soon close. Nia held tightly onto the strap of her backpack, trying not to show how frightened she was becoming. Then came the accusation that changed everything. The airline employee suggested that the girls might not actually be authorized to travel alone. The implication hit harder than the words themselves. The twins were 15, dressed neatly, carrying valid documents, and had traveled before. Yet suddenly, their presence at the gate was being treated as suspicious. A supervisor was called over. Instead of immediately resolving the situation, the supervisor repeated the same concerns and began examining their documents again. The twins were asked where they were going, who their parents were, and why they were traveling without an adult standing beside them. Maya and Nia answered every question. Still, they were not allowed to board. The clock kept moving. Their flight was now minutes away from departure, and the twins could feel the pressure building around them. People nearby had started noticing. Some glanced over before looking away. Others slowed down as they passed, trying to understand why two young girls were being held at the gate. Then the employee made a decision. The twins were told they would have to leave the boarding area. For Maya and Nia, that was the moment confusion turned into fear. They had done nothing wrong. They had followed every instruction. Yet they were being removed from a flight they had legally booked and were fully prepared to take. And there was something the airline employees still didn't know. The girls weren't completely helpless. Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Nia immediately understood what she was about to do. Their father, Marcus Carter, had always told them that if they ever felt unsafe or were being treated unfairly, they should call him immediately. So Maya made the call. Across the country, Marcus was in the middle of a business meeting when his phone began ringing. He almost ignored it. Then he saw his daughter's name. Everything changed. Because Marcus wasn't just their father. He was the CEO of a company with major business relationships across the aviation industry, and within minutes of hearing what had happened, He was about to make a decision that could affect far more than one flight. Marcus answered the phone expecting a simple family emergency. Instead, he heard that his daughters had been stopped at the gate, denied boarding, and ordered away from the flight despite having valid tickets and identification. For a moment, he said nothing. Then the shock turned into something deeper. Marcus immediately contacted his executive team and reviewed the details of the flight. What had happened to Maya and Nia was no longer just a family problem. It was a serious incident involving a company whose aviation partnerships depended on trust, safety, and professional conduct. Back at the airport, the twins were still waiting with their bags beside them. The plane had already departed without them. They had missed their flight. They had been embarrassed in front of strangers. And worst of all, they still had no clear explanation for why they had been treated differently. Then Marcus made the call that changed everything. His company began suspending its commercial relationships with the airline involved. Contracts were placed under immediate review. Future business commitments were frozen. Senior executives were instructed to investigate every detail of what had happened at the gate. The airlines suddenly realized this wasn't a minor customer service complaint. A major corporate partner was pulling away. Within hours, the story reached the airline's senior leadership. What had looked like an ordinary boarding dispute was now becoming a serious business crisis. And Marcus wasn't finished. He demanded that the incident be investigated, not because his daughters were powerful, but because he wanted to know why two young black girls had been treated as though they didn't belong on a plane they had every right to board. That question changed the entire situation. The airline could no longer hide behind a routine explanation. Security footage, boarding records, employee reports, and witness accounts were suddenly being examined. And as the evidence came together, one uncomfortable question became impossible to ignore. If Marcus Carter had never answered that phone call, would anyone have cared enough to ask why his daughters were stopped in the first place? The investigation eventually confirmed what Maya and Nia had already known. They had valid tickets, proper identification, and every requirement needed to board their flight. The airline acknowledged that the twins had been handled improperly and that the decision to remove them from the boarding process had not been justified. But an apology could not erase what had happened. Maya and Nia had learned something that no teenager should have to learn that way, that sometimes simply being treated as though you don't belong can leave a wound long after the moment is over. Marcus refused to let the incident disappear behind a private settlement or a carefully worded statement. He pushed for broader changes, including stronger employee training, clearer procedures for questioning young travelers, and greater accountability when passengers were singled out without legitimate cause. The story also spread beyond the family. People began asking uncomfortable questions about how quickly assumptions can replace facts, especially when race and age become part of someone's first impression. For many viewers, the twins' experience felt painfully familiar, not because every situation ends with a powerful CEO making a phone call, but because most people who experience discrimination don't have that kind of protection. That was the part Marcus wanted people to remember. His daughters shouldn't have needed a famous father, a powerful company, or a threatening business decision to be treated with basic dignity. They should have received it simply because they were human beings. Maya and Nia eventually continued their lives, but the experience stayed with them. It became a lesson in courage, awareness, and the importance of speaking up when something feels wrong. Because discrimination doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it appears in a question that shouldn't have been asked, a door that suddenly closes, or a decision made before someone even gets the chance to prove they belong. And if two innocent girls needed one phone call to be heard, how many people without that phone call are still waiting for someone to listen? If this story made you think, share it. And remember, dignity should never depend on who has power.